Welcome down to my 9-foot homemade oak bar. Pour yourself a cold one. You are listening to Bucs in the Basement. My name's Chris, and Craig here is the biggest Pirates fan you'll ever meet. Let's talk Pirates baseball now. Welcome to Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
Spring training, players frolicking in the sun, hope springs eternal, everybody's in the best shape of their life. Bob nutting over the last couple of weeks, hanging out by the batting cages with Brian Reynolds before he goes off and makes comments about how the CBA is terrible and this billionaire can't afford to field the Major League Baseball team. Well, then sell it, for crying out loud, to somebody who can. It's Bucs in the Basement. How are you, my friend?
Doing pretty good, man. Yeah, those comments that he made were, goofy to say the least. Saying that he didn't really agree that everything favored the Pirates, but he didn't want to hold stuff up by voting against it. Well, you had to have an ownership group of, what did we say, 8 owners for it to be turned down. So
now I feel like he was one of the 8 at the beginning, right? Like, with those comments, don't you feel confident that when we saw that initial delay that took away the first week of the season, Bob Nutting probably was one of the owners that they had to move over to the other side? Because the way he talked, it sounded like he was so upset about it, and he finally only signed off because he didn't want the season to go away. He was probably one of those owners in those first few votes when they were like, why can't we get this deal done, that didn't want to agree to it.
That definitely seems like that would be the case. And to me, it's not a bad thing. He's not a great speaker. We all know this. So
not
instead
a great
of him just
spender
basically
either.
saying, instead of him just basically saying, yeah, I was against it, and I, gave into it, he just says that, yeah, it kind of wasn't so great for the Pirates, and nothing really benefited us, but, I didn't want to hold things up. It's a very goofy way, and anything that he says during this spring training it's not going to come out well. Like him standing in front of the team, giving the state of the Pirates address like he does at the beginning of every spring training. At least this time he actually spoke with reporters at some point after that. But until the payroll goes up and until the Pirates keep winning, or start winning, I should say, everybody's going to have the same opinion of Nutting, and even if they do start winning and the payroll goes up, some people are still going to make the same comments about him. It's just a very weird statement to make on him.
Well, here's the thing. I don't buy it anymore. I'm sorry, Bob. In fact, I never bought it. Let's be honest. We've always said we don't buy it. I've always said, look at the guy's net worth. Look at what other billionaires spend on their team. Major League Baseball gives money to the Pirates with the revenue sharing. He gets extra money. What is he doing with it, for crying out loud, right? He is a cheap guy. And the only thing I've ever said is that whoever the general manager is, and at this point it's Ben Cherington, he has to understand who his owner is and then act accordingly when building a team. I separate them out. I say, look, the owner's bad for the team. The owner doesn't spend any money. The owner's a miser. The owner throws around nickels like they're manhole covers. But it's very hard to replace an owner, folks. So then when you're trying to look at the team, you go, can the general manager work within the constraints of the owner? And that's how I kind of separate them out. But Bob Nutting is, I look, I don't get it. When I could see the San Diego Padres do what they did over the last couple of years with the signings they made and then extending Machado to a ridiculous amount of years and money. That's a team that was getting help like the Pirates were getting. That's very similar in terms of the audience base as the Pittsburgh Pirates, that decided you have to spend money to make money. And then Rob Manfred says recently, I think this week, at some point, possibly this year, they're going to go from being a team that receives money during the revenue sharing to one that pays in because they're making so much money. Bob Nutting is a billionaire that could be a 10-time billionaire if he just had any business sense. And hopefully the great Padres experiment starts to show some of these owners that if you spend money, you make money. Because there's no difference really in what's going on in San Diego than what could go on here in Pittsburgh if you had a forward-thinking owner that invested back into his team and understood if you build it, they will come. Pittsburgh's a great sports town. And the idea that the Pirates constantly concede to the idea of, well, nobody really cares about us because of the Steelers is a real cop-out that I'm sick of listening to.
It's definitely a cop-out. And the thing with the Padres, and I even look at like the St. Louis Cardinals, as the way that they not only build their team, but build, I guess it would be well, I know St. Louis, it's a ballpark village. With San Diego, it's very similar, and they brought in, all these, they made it a destination place to go and hang out, and they took ownership in that. So they were able to, make some money off of, number one, San Diego they have 100% ownership rights of all the parking around their stadium. The Pirates have 0. Ballpark Village, St. Louis has ownership in that. All of the stuff that was built on the North Shore that's absolutely great, Shorty's Pints and Pins and Tequila Cowboy and all that stuff. Like, the Pirates have no stock or no ownership in the parking, in anything. So as far as like a business sense as well, to me, it's like, well, you kind of dropped the ball when all of that stuff was coming about, and you didn't invest in that and actually be the one that's on the front end of that. Now, that's not where all the money comes for, St. Louis and the Padres.
But it makes sense to do it. I mean, let's think about what teams have done when new ownership has moved in that Bob Nutting didn't do at any point here. You got the Chicago Cubs when the Rickeses came in, looked at a ballpark that was falling apart. They had concrete coming off of the second level into the first level, and they put nets above the people to protect them from the falling building, right? That's how bad it was when the Wrigley company owned it, when the Tribune company owned it, right? So then the Rickeses come in, and first they got to fix the ballpark because it's a cathedral, and we've got to keep it for the history and everything else and blah, blah, blah. But then what they also did is they started buying up property around it. And they started working with the city council, and they started coming up with a plan for a little village. And now they have one, and they use that park constantly for all kinds of other events, and they are generating more revenue as a result. And there's a lot of teams that do that. The Texas Rangers, when they built their ballpark years ago, were one of the first to do that. They basically put a parking lot around that stadium and then put bars that they owned along the side of it. Now, not everybody can get away with that. I know the Pirates don't have as much room around where they're at. All right, fine. But look at the High Line and the fact you can walk across the river there and all the businesses that moved in right on the other side of it. And you got breweries moving in there and you got it building up. You missed the ball on that one, Bob. You could have found places to invest a little bit more to build more of a baseball village. There's no forethought, right? Again, a billionaire that could be worth 10 times more if he just thought a little bit ahead. And maybe he could hire a consultant from a team that actually makes money and ask him, how do you make money? Remember in Moneyball where the Billy Bean character, the Brad Pitt character, walks in and goes, who are you? You seem to know what you're doing. I'm hiring you away from this team so you can tell me what I'm doing wrong. Bob, it's time to start doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, and getting those investments. I mean, we do have a new scoreboard, which is something this stadium has sorely needed for the past, 10, 15 years.
Right, you're one of the last to get it, though.
Yeah. Yeah, but at least we will get to see our team lose in high definition.
Again, I still think that this team is going to make some noise. They're gonna make some noise. I would love to see them get off early in the race and be respectable. And at some point, of course, it'll start to fall off. But it'd be great if they could just jump in there, make some noise, be closer to 500, and start to move in a winning direction. And you know, again, that's the GM separate from the owner. I want the owner to spend money so the GM's job is easier. I just know that the owner won't, right? So, I mean, like, I would love it. If I woke up tomorrow and Bob Nutting had sold the team, celebration, streamers, champagne, drinking bourbon. I mean, it'd be a grand thing. I just don't think that it's going to happen in a while. But it is kind of crazy. You could see other teams go out and find ways to create more revenue streams, build their team up. And again, you look at the Padres, they were getting paid. Now they're going to be paying other teams because of how much money that they're making. Bob, you're failing.
If you ever see me out and about in Pittsburgh, you will always recognize me, and not just because of the white beard, but also because of the Y that is always on top of my head, the hat I always wear. The Yins brand, proud partners with Bucs in the Basement. 3 dynasties, 1 brand, Yins. Finally, 1 brand to rep all black and gold. Follow at Shop Yins for new merch drops and giveaways. Order online at www.shopyins, the emphasis on the 2 Z's, high quality comfort, lightweight materials, a new modern look for the black and gold, made for Yins by a Yinzer. Now we have to turn to, you know, what we're watching on our TV screens. And I know you went in the beginning, Chris, with like the hope springs eternal and this guy's in the best shape of his life. But over these first few games, I mean, I feel like there are some things and little inklings of what the manager's giving us as to how this, you know, team will be constructed and how players will be deployed, you know, moving into, you know, the first few weeks of the season. And the biggest one, and it kind of just came out, you know, yesterday, because people asked Derek Shelton, you know, the first 2 games, you got Brian Reynolds over there and left, you got Jack Sawinski in center, and it's just like, yeah, that's something we could probably see more often than not, you know, as the season progresses. And for me, I mean, I think I was, you know, when it's like when Starling Marte was still here and we were thinking, could Brian Reynolds, you know, take over center field? And he did have, you know, some attributes, some athleticism enough to be able to do that. He had a very good season by certain, you know, analytics, but still has not done very well. I mean, the 2 main analytics that are used for outfielders is defensive runs saved and outs above average. And, you know, I wish that there was an easier way to explain each of these, but I mean, it's comparing them, you know, against the rest of the league. The outs above average is like the number of outs above average that you have compared to everybody else in your position. Defensive runs saved is, I mean, influenced by if you're able to throw out a guy at second base, the errors. I mean, it puts all of these metrics into there. And Brian Reynolds last year had possibly, I mean, one of the most horrendous defensive seasons that anybody could have probably even imagined from him in center field. -7 outs above average. And then you go over to the defensive runs saved, and it doesn't get any better. But the defensive runs saved were just as bad kind of during the previous season.
So you're saying it's a good thing. It's a good defensive move to move him out of center field?
Yeah, because 2021...
So I can put away my tinfoil hat that the team is putting him in left field because it makes him less valuable? Because it does. I mean, there was just a thing that went out there where they were talking about the signing of Nimmo Remember the Mets outfielder who could play center field?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea that he was worth a lot more because it's very hard to find center fielders that can hit out there. But so my first reaction was, well, of course you got to move him to left field. You make him less valuable. But now when you point it out, maybe it's a defensive liability to keep him out in center field.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I was going to look like it's 2021, -5 defensive runs saved. Last year, -14 defensive runs saved out there in center field. And yes, I mean, for one thing, it's nice to have what you have is one of he's like your most veteran outfielder. I mean, other than McCutchen when he's out there on those days playing center field. But if his athleticism isn't going to, it's at some point in time, you have to make decisions to make your team better, not just to either appease your players or to, I mean, in this ways, make him more valuable. I don't know. I think that they don't look at things that way. They look at the analytics of what is going to make you be able to put your best team on the field. And Jack Sawinski, by statistical metrics, is a better center fielder.
What's the biggest battle you think right now in spring training? Like, who are you watching right now that you're sitting there going, I wonder if this guy can make the team, or this guy could get knocked off the team? Because, I mean, that's always my most fun thing to do at this time of year, right? I mean, you're going to get somebody who just jumps out in the first couple days. But in reality, like, I love looking for positional battles. Like, right now, is there one that you're watching more than anything else?
Rodolfo Castro and G1 Bay. I mean, it's for second base. It seems to be, one of the bigger battles that has kind of emerged just because when we had Rob Biertempfel on, a few weeks ago, he had said that, in one of his articles that they would be looking at G1 Bay to see if, they would want him to play a little bit more outfield, a little bit more infield, and they wanted to, kind of centralize him in that. A lot of people were putting him in center field because he had played a few games and does have the athleticism to do so. But Cherington and them, they'd said that they want to kind of, not spread him out as much and to get him into and seeing him defensively at second base. I mean, even with the new shift restrictions and everything, he made, I can't remember, I think it was yesterday. We're recording here on Tuesday, but it would have been the game on Monday, made a couple of nice little plays, even with those shift restriction coming, in front of and then behind second base to kind of and throw across his body, make a few nice plays out there. He doesn't have the raw power that Rodolfo Castro has, but in showing right now a little bit better of a fielder and definitely a more hit to contact kind of guy. So that's one that's really emerging there. I don't know what they would do if he would push Rodolfo Castro out. I would still see Rodolfo Castro on, the roster. Rodolfo Castro plays, second base and third base, but, really not a whole lot else. Would you be able to get him enough at bats off of the bench? G1 Bay can play shortstop and second base as well as the outfield. I mean, I feel like there's a way that they could kind of both, I don't know if it would be win the battle, but split the battle. And then G1 Bay could get enough at bats, playing all over the field.
Well, listen, here's the thing. G1 Bay, if he's better defensively, and I'm looking at the two of them at the plate, I actually almost kind of lean towards Bay. And the reason I do that is because when I just go and take a look at their run through the minors, I see a much better weighted runs created is WRC plus from level to level for Bay over Castro. And he had a very small sample size, but in his small sample size was very productive when he was at the plate. Okay. His WRC plus was, which is basically a metric of trying to figure out, is he getting on base? Well, I think Carlos Correa explained this perfectly in the offseason. Somebody asked him about it on MLB Tonight, and he was breaking it down. And I know a lot of people don't get into the deep sabermetrics, so I always try to say it in the simplest forms. But what he was trying to say was, really, your WRC plus is measuring that when I'm in a slump, do I take more pitches and at least work my way on, or am I wearing down the pitcher? And am I, when I'm hot, am I taking advantage of it And when I'm cold, am I walking more? And it makes me more of a consistent hitter. And that's like the main thing that I look at. That came from Correa when he was trying to explain how he looks at that stat and what it means to him. And when I look at Bay, I just see more consistency in what he produces. And when you look at the very small sample size that he had in the majors, he did better. Now, I don't know how that translates out to 162, but if he has a big spring, he'll be the second baseman, I think. And I think you're right, though. Castro stays on the bench. He's not going anywhere. It'll just be interesting to see who's getting the majority of at-bats. They're both probably going to break camp with the team, I think. So, but the only question is, do you want to give a guy like Bay an opportunity and give him a couple of months? You might lean that way. If he's hot in spring training, whoever's hot, let him go. But when you let him go, don't be like 2 days here and 1 day here in this platoon thing. Let your guys go. I've complained about that a lot during this rebuild. When you're trying to decide which guy's better for the long term, you've got to plug them in and let them make their mistakes and go through a bad week without pulling them out and then making them, you're in the lineup, you're out of the lineup. Consistency and knowing that you're going to be there every day for a little while breeds success. And so that's what I hope that they're doing. They're going to identify it in spring training, but when they come up with their opening day lineup, that opening day lineup is playing more times than not.
Yeah, and the other one that, kind of sticks out in my mind as far as the positional battles is whether or not they are going to keep what I would see as a fifth outfielder. Because right now, I mean, you have McCutchen and you have Joe as your two, right-handed options. You have Reynolds and Sawinski. And I could see them just kind of rotating with, McCutchen, I think, taking, more DH at bats. Connor Joe, I see him. I didn't know exactly where he was going to fit in, especially with McCutchen and before, Miguel Andujar going down and all this. I just didn't know. But right now, I mean, he can also, I keep on bringing up, he can also play first base. So you're looking at that, positional flexibility. And he's like one of those veteran guys that we have kind of talked about throughout this offseason, Chris, that if you don't get him quote unquote regular at bats or everyday at bats, I don't think it'll have as much effect on him because he's more of I don't know if it's established professional hitter or just a more seasoned, professional hitter, and he should be able to adjust to that a little bit better. But looking at the outfield, I mean, there's so many different names, but number one, Cal Mitchell, and I know it's just the first few games, but even going into last year, just doesn't look like he can play the outfield position. The guy is one of our best hitters, and he was within the minors last year, but he also doesn't have enough pop in the bat to be like a DH. I think that at the end of last season, I said, get that man a first base glove to see if we can, find another position for him. Because he just doesn't play decision-wise, arm-wise. I think that he had caught a ball during this spring training games, and he went to switch it to his hand and just completely dropped the ball. I mean, it was just try to make a play in the outfield, end up running into the wall after turning himself around. And I know there's the winds and stuff in Bradenton, but he just doesn't look comfortable in the outfield. So it's like, want to see what happens with him. Kaden Smith-Njigba coming back from an injury. I don't know if we're going to get to see enough from him. Travis Swaggerty. So that's where it's like, I could almost see them, keeping on the bench, keeping, say Rodolfo Castro wins the job, keeping a Bay and a Tucapita Marcano, two guys that could play infield and outfield, as opposed to, somebody that's strictly an outfielder, especially when, I mean, you have, with McCutchen, I would say 3.5 outfielders, because McCutchen over the past few years has DH'd more than he's played the field, and I would look for that to continue.
Versatility is so important. It's been a trend over the last many years here in Major League Baseball, and even now, even though you added that 26 man, right? When you add the 26 man, you restricted it to 13 positional players and 13 pitchers, and you couldn't just play around with it and be like, we're going to take 12 pitchers and have 14 players and have a deep bench. It doesn't work that way anymore. So, you're right. I think the versatility would make me think that Marcano could be joining Bay and Castro. Let's say Bay ends up as the second baseman, or even if Castro does, the other one's on the bench along with Marcano. That makes a lot of sense to me. I get that. The catcher position, I think, is the most interesting thing to me. I mean, if Endy Rodriguez makes it so that there's no way that you can deny him, you would think he would go with Hedges, right? Or do you think that it's pretty much a given that they might hold him back a little bit?
I mean, I think they're going to hold him back a little bit. Derek Shelton made those comments, the whole way back,
But I hate those comments. I don't want to accept those comments.
Yeah, I don't want to make those comments either, and I didn't like those comments. But I mean, looking at it, the more I look at it, Chris, I think it's just because if this was a different position, I think I've said this on the show, I think I've written about it, is just that if this was a different position other than catcher, I think you could take some of the lumps defensively that he, may experience at second base or in the outfield or at first base or wherever he would be. But when you have somebody like in charge of such a young pitching staff, and especially if if Hedges went down, God forbid, because he brings so much defensively. Because I will say, the one thing I love about Hedges is he is working the base runners once they get on base to kind of help his pitchers out because, with the new rule changes, they can't step off as much. I've seen him throw down to second base, throw down to first base and stuff to keep runners closer to the bag for his pitchers, which I have absolutely loved. But going back to...
Well, no. Before you go into that, that sparked something that I saw this week in a spring training game or in a highlight. And it backs up what you're saying, that you want to have guys that are experienced defensively behind the dish this year. It's not 2 pickoff throws over. It's 2 disengagements.
Yeah.
So I watched in a spring training game. I was flipping through to different ones. I can't remember which team I was watching. I was just flipping through to different matchups, wasting time here on my desktop. And I come across a game where there's a guy on third base, and the base runner is purposely coming down the third base line, and he comes down far enough that the pitcher takes his foot off the rubber, and the umpire goes disengagement. So if the third baseman can mess with the pitcher enough, you don't even need to throw over to first. You get 2 disengagements, and now the guy on first can take second.
Yeah.
Remember in Little League when you learn that thing, if you get first and third, and it'd be like, well, if I go for second and the catcher can't get me, or if he throws down, maybe my guy can get the timing down and he can steal home because the ball's got to go from the catcher to second base and back to home. There's a new strategy now on first and third, where if you can antagonize the pitcher enough and the battery is not working very well with each other, a pitcher could get rattled enough that he uses up his disengagements while they're still early in the count. And now you get the big lead over at first base, and mayhem could ensue. And runners are going to be able to run up from first to second, and you got second and third a lot more often when you started off the count at first and third. That struck me as the strategy that can come out of this. And the catcher really needs to be alert. He really needs to be paying attention to it. Communication is so key in this entire thing because of what can happen now on the base bats. Smart teams are going to take advantage of those rules.
Yeah, and that's for why I would think that, it's going to be weird in AAA because they're going to have the automated strike zone. So a player coming up from AAA to the majors, unless they're being, just basically do whatever you were going to do, no matter what it was going to be, without or with the automated strike zone. Because when you go up to the majors, at least this year, you're not going to have it. But for me, it's the... Like I said, all these new rule changes and having... And
think about that. Hold on. Think about that. That means that if there's an automated strike zone, the catcher is no longer concerned with framing the pitch, right? So now he can position himself as the pitch is coming more so to be ready to pop and throw than to receive the pitch.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have to worry about glove position as it comes in. So a catcher in AAA will find himself leaning more towards what's going on in the base paths and then come to the majors and not and won't be performing in the same way as if. I mean, that's the real problem with that rule being in AAA and not being up at the majors. You know, I mean, I'm so torn on that too, because I really do enjoy the pitch clock. I know people hate it, but I love it. I think they're all going to get used to the pitch clock, and games are going to move a little bit quicker. And what's going to happen is, you know, you're going to see far more vendors walking up and down aisles, and you're going to see teams start saying, you know what, keep beer open an extra inning, because they're all going to start losing money because of how fast the game is going.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? You're not going to waste as much money at the ballpark. Watch them try to counteract that and make ballpark accommodations even better for the fan. And like, your experience, I think, may get I mean, I heard a comment the other day during a broadcast, like from two radio announcers. Again, flipping around. I like listening to radio in different towns and stuff because I was a radio announcer, and I like flipping around and listening to games. And the MLB product, I hate the blackouts, you know, but I mean, it does allow you to kind of check out everybody in Major League Baseball. And they were talking about how they can't get through a story now because the game moves so fast. So now they actually have to broadcast. I mean, think about that. Think about how, like, all the solo guys, like Vin Scully used to sit up there and just talk to himself, right? But then we got into this thing. Harry Carey used to sit by himself. There's lots of guys. Jack Brickhouse used to sit by himself. Lots of announcers in the old days sat by themselves, right? And then you brought in another guy because the game got so slow, he needed somebody to talk to. Well, now the poor color guy, he's never getting a word in if you're calling the game because the game is moving so quickly. So, I mean, there's something about that that's fascinating to me. I know not everybody loves the pitch clock thing, but I think if they get used to it, it's going to be amazing for game experience. Except for the thing that I saw the other day where it was a 0-0 count, and both the batter and the pitcher weren't ready, and umpire Doug Eddings charged them each, one with a ball and one with a strike, and the count started at 1-1. And my question was, well, what happens when there's a full count and they both aren't ready on time? So there's problems. It'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to watch, Chris. And just going back, like, as a prediction right now, I think it's going to be Hedges and Plawecki, because once Endy has gotten some more experience, you would want one of those veteran guys up there. And at some point in time, a guy's either going to get injured, not perform, traded because a team could be looking for a backup catcher moving towards the playoffs in Austin Hedges. So I'm fine with Endy being down there. I think his bat's ready. I just think that even if you play him in multiple positions, I mean, first base is pretty full right now. Second base is a place he could possibly slide into. Outfield's a little bit. And to tell you the truth, I mean, he's gotten like maybe 200 plus innings in AA and AAA catching.
I'm going to see him this year, though, right? I'm going to see him get up to the majors this year, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would assume so, but I don't know if it's going to be for as long as everybody thinks it's going to be for. I mean, I think everybody thinks that once it gets past the Super 2.
I want you to be negative about him playing regularly for the Pirates and trade him to me for my fantasy baseball team. All right? Trade's on the way. Looking at it right now. You don't believe in it? I believe it. Send him to my team.